My name is Rebecca Miller, and at 32 years old, I thought I'd outgrown family drama. But last December, 1 week before Christmas, I returned to my childhood home in Mapleton after being away for years. As I approached the kitchen, I froze. Through the crack in the door, I overheard my family planning something that made my blood run cold. They were coordinating a public humiliation, for me, in front of everyone at our Christmas dinner. I couldn't believe it. After all these years, some things never change. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me as I reveal what happened when I decided enough was enough. To understand why overhearing that conversation shook me to my core, you need to know about the Miller family dynamic. I grew up in Mapleton, a small Midwest town where everyone knows everyone's business. Our family consisted of my parents, Margaret and Harold, my older brother James, and my younger sister Ellie. From the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect American family. Dad worked at the local bank, Mom taught second grade, and we kids were involved in various school activities. But behind closed doors, our family had a particular tradition that I dreaded: public roasting and practical jokes. It started when I was around 8 years old. At family gatherings, holidays, and birthdays, someone would inevitably become the target of an elaborate prank or public mockery session disguised as all in good fun. My father and brother were the primary instigators, but Mom and Ellie would join in too. As the most sensitive member of the family, I frequently found myself as the butt of these jokes. "Rebecca's just too serious," my father would say, ruffling my hair after I'd run away crying from yet another harmless prank. "She needs to lighten up." Being the middle child, I already struggled to find my place. James was the athletic golden boy who followed in Dad's footsteps, playing football and hunting on weekends. Ellie was Mom's mini-me, social and outgoing, involved in cheerleading and student government. Then there was me, bookish, artistic, and perpetually feeling like I didn't quite fit in. I found refuge in academics and art. While my siblings attended local sporting events, I'd be in my room sketching or reading classic literature that my classmates had never heard of. My parents attended James's games and Ellie's competitions religiously, but my art shows and academic achievements were often met with perfunctory acknowledgement. "That's nice, honey," Mom would say, glancing briefly at my straight-A report card before asking James about his upcoming game. The summer after high school graduation marked a turning point. I received a partial scholarship to study advertising at Northwestern University in Chicago, the first person in our family to attend college outside state lines. While my parents expressed pride, there was an undercurrent of confusion about my choice. "Why go all the way to Chicago when there's a perfectly good state university here?" Dad asked repeatedly. "Seems like a waste of money to me." College was liberating. For the first time, I found myself among people who valued the same things I did: creativity, intellectual curiosity, and ambition beyond the boundaries of our small town. I thrived in my classes and secured internships that eventually led to a position at a prestigious advertising agency in downtown Chicago after graduation. Visits home became increasingly infrequent. I'd return for major holidays, staying for the minimum socially acceptable time before retreating back to my life in the city. Each visit followed a predictable pattern: initial warm welcomes followed by subtle digs about my fancy city life, questions about when I'd settle down with a nice boy, and inevitably, some form of public embarrassment orchestrated by my family. Last Thanksgiving, my father brought out my elementary school diary and read selected passages aloud to extended family, including my first crush and embarrassing preteen thoughts. When I objected, everyone laughed and told me to take a joke. I'd built a life I was proud of in Chicago. My apartment wasn't large, but it was in a vibrant neighborhood with cafes and art galleries. My job as a creative director allowed me to express myself and earn recognition for my ideas. I had friends who understood me, dated occasionally, and felt content with my independence. Then came the economic downturn. 3 months ago, my agency lost its biggest client, and layoffs followed. Despite my position and tenure, I was among those let go. Last in, first out, my boss explained apologetically as he handed me my severance package. For weeks, I sent out resumes and attended interviews, but the market was flooded with talented creatives from various downsized agencies. My savings dwindled as I continued paying Chicago rent without income. When my parents called about Christmas plans, I reluctantly admitted my situation. "Well, you always have a place here," Mom said, her voice carrying that mixture of concern and satisfaction that suggested she'd been waiting for my city experiment to fail. And so, with my lease ending and job prospects still uncertain, I packed up my Chicago apartment and headed back to Mapleton, not just for Christmas, but potentially for a longer stay until I got back on my feet. As I drove past the Welcome to Mapleton sign, I tried to maintain a positive outlook. Perhaps things would be different this time. Maybe my family would see me as the accomplished adult I'd become rather than the awkward, sensitive girl they remembered. Maybe, just maybe, they'd outgrown their need to embarrass me for entertainment. That hope lasted exactly 6 hours before I overheard their plans in the kitchen. The drive from Chicago to Mapleton took just over 4 hours, but it felt like traveling back in time. The sprawling suburbs gave way to farmland, and finally to the familiar landmarks of my hometown, the water tower painted with the high school mascot, the town square with its gazebo still decorated for every holiday, and Main Street with businesses that had been there since my childhood. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' two-story colonial around 4 p.m. The house looked the same as always, white with dark green shutters, holiday wreath on the front door, and my father's meticulous Christmas lights outlining the roof and windows. Before I could grab my luggage from the trunk, the front door swung open. "Becca's home," my mother called out, waving enthusiastically from the porch. She looked older than when I'd seen her last, more gray in her hair, deeper lines around her eyes, but her energy remained unchanged. The next hour was a flurry of hugs, questions about my drive, and comments about my appearance. "You look tired, honey, and still wearing all that black, I see." Dad clapped me on the shoulder, James gave me a bear hug that lifted me off the ground, and Ellie, who had arrived the day before, helped carry my bags to my old bedroom. My childhood room had been partially converted into a guest room over the years, but remnants of my past remained: debate team trophies on the bookshelf, a faded poster of Monet's Water Lilies, and photographs from high school tucked into the mirror frame. I unpacked a few essentials and sat on the edge of the bed, taking deep breaths to center myself. "You can do this," I whispered. "It's just 2 weeks. Maybe 3, tops, until you find something new." After freshening up, I headed downstairs for coffee, pausing at the sound of hushed voices coming from the kitchen. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but hearing my name stopped me in my tracks. "Rebecca's going to be so embarrassed," my sister Ellie said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Do you think it's too much?" My mother's voice held a hint of concern. "Are you kidding?" "It's perfect," James replied. "We've been planning this for months. Everyone's going to be there to see it." "I already talked to Tyler, and he's confirmed," Dad added. "He thinks it's hilarious and wants to bring his new wife." My stomach dropped. Tyler was my high school boyfriend, my first serious relationship that had ended messily when he cheated on me with a cheerleader. We hadn't spoken since graduation. "The video compilation is almost finished," James continued. "I found footage from that talent show disaster in 10th grade. And Mom dug up those old home videos from the lake house incident. It's going to be epic. She thinks she's so special with her fancy Chicago job and artsy friends," Ellie said. "This will be the perfect payback for her thinking she's better than us." "I invited everyone from her old high school friend group," Mom added. "Plus the neighbors and extended family. The Sullivans, the Johnsons, Aunt Martha, and Uncle Phil. And don't forget, it's a surprise," Dad emphasized. "Not a word to Becca. We'll wait until after dinner on Christmas when everyone's here, then boom." The ultimate Miller family tradition. Their laughter felt like ice water in my veins. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain they would hear it through the door. My hands trembled as I leaned against the wall, trying to process what I'd just heard. The talent show disaster they mentioned was particularly painful. At 16, I'd worked up the courage to sing a solo in the school talent show, only to freeze on stage from stage fright. After painful seconds of silence, I'd run off in tears to the sound of scattered laughter. I'd never performed publicly again. The lake house incident was even worse, a family vacation when I was 13 where I'd gotten my first period while wearing a white swimsuit. My brother had taken photos of me standing up from the lake chair, mortified at the stain, while the entire extended family watched. Those pictures were supposed to have been destroyed years ago. And Tyler? Why would they invite my ex-boyfriend and his new wife? The thought made me physically ill. I flashed back to countless similar humiliations, my 8th birthday when they put salt in my cake instead of sugar and filmed my reaction, my high school graduation party where Dad shared embarrassing baby photos with my entire class, last Christmas when Mom accidentally spilled wine on my white blouse before dinner with family friends. Each incident had been brushed off as just having fun or lighthearted family tradition. Each time, I was told I was too sensitive when I expressed hurt feelings. But this was different. This was premeditated, extensive, and designed to humiliate me in front of everyone I knew in Mapleton. And the comment about payback for thinking I'm better revealed the underlying resentment I'd always suspected but never confirmed. I stood frozen in the hallway, torn between confronting them immediately or pretending I hadn't heard anything. The logical part of me said confrontation would be healthiest, but years of conditioning kicked in. In our family, expressing hurt feelings only made you a bigger target. Taking a deep breath, I retreated silently up the stairs, returned to my bedroom, and closed the door. I needed time to think, to process, to decide how to respond. One thing was certain, I wouldn't, be the butt of their joke this time. Not again. Not after everything I'd accomplished and overcome. I splashed cold water on my face in the adjoining bathroom, practiced a neutral expression in the mirror, and headed back downstairs as if I'd heard nothing, all while my mind raced with questions. How would I get through the next week knowing what awaited me? Should I pack up and leave now? Where would I go with my limited funds? There she is, my father called as I entered the kitchen. Just in time for dinner. Your mother made your favorite pot roast. I forced a smile and took my usual seat at the table, hyper-aware of the conspiratorial glances exchanged across the mashed potatoes and dinner rolls. The game was on, but this time I wouldn't be playing by their rules. Dinner that first night was an exercise in restraint. Every smile from my family now seemed sinister, every question about my life in Chicago potentially gathering ammunition for their planned humiliation. I kept my answers vague and redirected questions back to them, learning that James had recently been promoted at his engineering firm and Ellie was considering graduate school after 2 years of teaching elementary school. "And what about you, Becca?" Dad asked, passing the green beans. "Any prospects on the horizon? Jobs or otherwise?" He exchanged a knowing look with Mom. "Several promising leads," I lied, pushing food around my plate. "I'm being selective." "Well, you can be selective all you want from your old bedroom," James joked, and everyone laughed except me. I helped Mom with dishes afterward, trying to act normal while fishing for information. "So who all is coming for Christmas dinner this year?" I asked casually, drying a serving platter. "Oh, the usual crowd. Grandma and Grandpa Miller, Aunt Martha, and Uncle Phil with their kids, the Johnsons from next door." She listed several more names before adding, "And I invited some of your old friends from high school. Thought it would be nice for you to reconnect." "Anyone specific?" I pressed, my heart rate increasing. "Grace Stevens for sure. Rachel Thompson. A few others." She avoided eye contact, scrubbing unnecessarily hard at an already clean pot. "Oh, and Tyler mentioned he might stop by with his wife. You remember Tyler, right?" As if I could forget my first heartbreak. "Vaguely," I replied, throat tight. "That's thoughtful of you. We just want you to feel welcome home," Mom said, patting my arm with a wet hand. "It's been so long since you've spent a proper Christmas here." The following morning, I made an excuse about running errands and drove to the local coffee shop, hoping to gather my thoughts away from the house. To my surprise, Grace Stevens was there, working on a laptop. We'd been close in high school before drifting apart after I moved to Chicago. Rebecca Miller, she exclaimed, waving me over. Your mom mentioned you were coming home. Sit down. Grace had always been kind, if somewhat gossipy. We exchanged updates on our lives. She was now a real estate agent in Mapleton, married with a toddler, before I cautiously steered the conversation toward Christmas plans. So Mom mentioned you're coming to our Christmas dinner? Wouldn't miss it, Grace replied, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Especially after what your mom said they have planned. Is it true you don't know? My stomach clenched. Know what? I shouldn't say anything. She bit her lip. But it sounds like something big is happening. Your brother was asking for old photos from high school, specifically from drama club, and that summer we all went to Lake Michigan. I forced a laugh. Oh, you know my family and their traditions. Always something embarrassing planned. I paused, then added, they didn't happen to mention anything specific, did they? Grace hesitated. Just that it involved a video presentation and that it would be unforgettable. James seemed really excited about it. I thanked her for the information, made an excuse about meeting someone else, and left, my coffee barely touched. The confirmation that this wasn't just family but involved my old social circle made everything worse. It wasn't just Christmas dinner, it was a public spectacle with me as the unwilling star. Back at home, I observed my family with new awareness. Dad spent unusual amounts of time in the basement workshop where our old family videos were stored. Mom was constantly on the phone, speaking in hushed tones that abruptly normalized when I entered the room. James and Ellie exchanged smirks when they thought I wasn't looking. That night, while everyone watched a Christmas movie, I snuck into my mother's study where she kept her planning notebooks. There, in her neat handwriting, I found a page titled Christmas Dinner with a detailed timeline. At 8 p.m., after dessert, was written, Special Presentation, Becca's Greatest Hits. Below that, video ready from James. Tyler confirmed. High school memories, Rachel bringing yearbooks. Talent show footage cleaned up. My hand shook as I quickly photographed the page with my phone and returned the notebook exactly as I'd found it. Back in my bedroom, I connected the dots. They had compiled a video of my most embarrassing moments, the talent show disaster, the lake house period incident, probably dozens of other humiliating memories, and planned to show it to everyone I knew from my hometown, including my ex-boyfriend and his new wife. The next morning, I tried a different approach, cornering my sister Ellie while she made coffee. Hey, Elle, is there something I should know about for Christmas dinner? Mom seems to be inviting a lot of people from my past. Ellie barely looked up from her phone. Why would there be? I don't know. It just seems like there's a surprise or something planned. You're being paranoid, she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Just because you ran away to the big city doesn't mean everything here is a conspiracy. The comment stung. I didn't run away. I built a career. A career you no longer have, she shot back, then immediately looked regretful. Sorry, that was mean. Look, just enjoy being home for once without overthinking everything, okay? Not everything is about you. But in this case, it literally was about me. I retreated, realizing I wouldn't get anything useful from my sister. 3 days after my arrival, I hit pay dirt. Everyone had gone out, Mom and Ellie Christmas shopping, Dad and James to pick up a tree, leaving me alone in the house. I seized the opportunity to investigate the basement, where Dad kept our old family videos. The storage area was dusty and cluttered, but I quickly found what I was looking for, a cardboard box labeled Becca videos that hadn't been there during my last visit. Inside were dozens of labeled VHS tapes and DVDs, Becca Birthday Disaster 1996, Talent Show Freeze Up, Lake Michigan Swimsuit, Prom Night Breakdown, and more, a catalog of my most painful memories. Next to the box sat Dad's laptop, open to a video editing program. The project file was titled Becca's Greatest Humiliations, Christmas 2023. I pressed play and watched in horror as clips of my most embarrassing moments played one after another, set to humiliating soundtrack choices like All by Myself and Loser. There I was at 8 years old, crying after a failed piano recital. At 13, covered in mud after falling off the dock at the lake. At 16, freezing on stage at the talent show. At 18, discovering my prom date had only asked me on a bet. Each clip expertly edited for maximum humiliation, with zooms on my tearful face and slow-motion replays of particularly mortifying moments. The finale was footage I'd never seen before, my ex-boyfriend Tyler recording a special introduction, standing with his arm around a beautiful blonde woman. "Can't wait to see you at Christmas, Becca," he said with a smirk. "Hope you're ready for the spotlight." I closed the laptop, feeling physically ill. This wasn't just a prank, it was emotional cruelty disguised as entertainment. And the fact that they'd reached out to Tyler, involving him in this humiliation after what he'd done to me, felt like the ultimate betrayal. That night, I barely slept, anxiety gnawing at me. I contemplated packing my car and leaving, but my financial situation made that impossible. I had less than $2,000 to my name and no place to go. Chicago rent would be impossible without a job, and I had no close friends with spare rooms during the holidays. I was trapped, with only 3 days left before the Christmas dinner where my family planned to destroy what little dignity I had left in my hometown. The morning of December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, I woke with a sense of dread so profound it felt physical. My nights had become sleepless, my appetite non-existent. Every interaction with my family was now tainted by what I knew they were planning. That morning, I overheard another damning conversation. I was heading to the shower when I heard James on the phone in his old bedroom, door slightly ajar. "Yeah, we got it all digitized finally," he was saying. "Dad and I spent hours going through the old VHS tapes. You should see some of this footage, man. The talent show stuff is gold." She just stands there like a statue before running off stage crying. A pause as the person on the other end spoke. "No, she has no idea. Mom's invited practically everyone from high school, plus the whole extended family. Tyler's bringing his wife. You know, the one he left Becca for? They're married now with a baby on the way." Another pause. "Trust me, it's going to be epic. 25 years of Becca's most embarrassing moments all in one video. We've got the talent show, the swimsuit incident, her falling into the punch bowl at prom, that time she thought Brad Wilson was asking her out but he was actually just borrowing a pencil." I leaned against the wall, feeling lightheaded. 25 years? They had been cataloging my humiliations for my entire life? Anyway, be there at 6 on Christmas Day. Don't tell Becca if you see her around town. It's going to be the surprise of her life. I slipped back into my room before James could exit his, my heart pounding. The scope of their plan was even larger than I'd imagined. Not just a few embarrassing clips but a comprehensive chronicle of my every vulnerable moment, curated for the entertainment of people who were supposed to love me. That afternoon, Mom asked me to pick up some last-minute groceries. At the store, I ran into Mrs. Johnson, our next-door neighbor. "Rebecca, dear. So lovely to see you," she greeted me warmly. "We're looking forward to Christmas dinner at your parents'. It's been years since we've seen you." "It'll be nice to catch up," I replied automatically. "Your mother mentioned there would be some special entertainment this year," she continued, eyes twinkling. "Something about a surprise presentation?" So my mother was actively promoting the humiliation to guests. "Yes, I've heard something about that," I managed. "Well, we wouldn't miss it. The whole neighborhood is coming. Your mother said it would be quite memorable. The whole neighborhood would witness my humiliation." I thanked Mrs. Johnson, finished shopping quickly, and sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, trying not to hyperventilate. Back home, I discovered that my ex-boyfriend Tyler had called the house phone while I was out. He wanted to confirm he's coming to dinner with Jessica, Mom informed me casually. Isn't that nice? I always liked Tyler. Did you like when he cheated on me senior year? I asked before I could stop myself. Mom looked surprised at my directness. Well, you were both so young. water under the bridge now. Besides, it worked out, he seems very happy with Jessica. They're expecting their first baby in March. The casual cruelty of the comment hit me like a physical blow. I excused myself and retreated to my room, where I finally broke down. Curled on my childhood bed, I sobbed into the same pillow that had absorbed my teenage tears years ago. The humiliation video was bad enough, but inviting Tyler and his pregnant wife, the woman he'd left me for, felt deliberately hurtful. My family knew how devastated I'd been when Tyler cheated. They'd witnessed my heartbreak firsthand. Yet they'd not only invited him but involved him in their plan to humiliate me further. As night fell, the house grew quiet. I sat at my window, looking out at the snow-covered yard illuminated by Christmas lights, and contemplated my options. I could confront my family directly, but past experience suggested they would deny any ill intent, call me oversensitive, and possibly make the eventual humiliation even worse. I could leave, but where would I go? A hotel would quickly deplete my limited savings. None of my Chicago friends were close enough to impose on during the holidays. And running away would feel like admitting defeat, confirming their narrative that I was weak and couldn't take a joke. I pulled out my photo albums, flipping through images of my life. Pictures of college graduation, my first apartment, awards ceremonies at work, trips with friends, evidence of the life I'd built for myself beyond Mapleton. Then earlier photos, awkward school portraits, family vacations where I always seemed to be standing slightly apart, high school events where my smile never quite reached my eyes. Had I always been the outsider in my own family? The one who didn't quite fit? Or had they made me feel that way through years of targeted jokes and public humiliation? My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda, my best friend in Chicago. "How's hometown hell? Surviving the family?" I hesitated, then typed back, "They're planning to humiliate me at Christmas dinner. Compiled a video of embarrassing moments to show everyone. Ex-boyfriend involved. Feeling trapped." Amanda's response was immediate, "WTF? That's not normal family behavior. That's bullying. You know that, right?" Something about seeing it described as bullying by someone outside the situation clarified things for me. For years, I'd accepted my role as the family punching bag because I'd been conditioned to believe it was normal, that I was too sensitive, that this is just how families joke around. But Amanda was right. This wasn't normal. This was systematic emotional abuse disguised as family tradition. My phone rang, Amanda calling for a proper conversation. "Listen to me," she said when I answered. "What they're doing is cruel and wrong. You don't deserve this. No one does." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, voice breaking. "I can't afford to leave, but I can't sit through that dinner and watch everyone laugh at me." "Then don't," Amanda said firmly. "You're not that scared teenager anymore, Beck. You're a successful, capable woman who's built a life on her own terms. Don't let them reduce you to the person they want you to be." "But how do I stop it?" "They won't listen to me." "Then make them listen. Take control of the narrative. You're a creative director, for God's sake. You know how to shape perception better than anyone." After we hung up, I lay awake most of the night, Amanda's words replaying in my mind. She was right, I wasn't powerless anymore. I'd built campaigns for major brands, managed teams of creative professionals, pitched to rooms full of executives. I had skills and strengths my family didn't recognize or value, but they were real nonetheless. As dawn broke on December 23rd, I made a decision. I wouldn't run away. I wouldn't confront them directly. I would take control of the situation on my own terms. For the first time since overhearing their plan, I felt something beyond anxiety and hurt. I felt determination. And something else, something that had been dormant in my interactions with my family for years, power. December 24th arrived with heavy snowfall, blanketing Mapleton in postcard-perfect white. Christmas Eve had always been my favorite part of the holiday, the anticipation, the quiet beauty, the traditions not yet marred by whatever humiliation awaited on Christmas Day. I woke early, having barely slept, and headed downstairs to make coffee before anyone else was up. To my surprise, Mrs. Sullivan, our elderly neighbor from across the street, was sitting at the kitchen table with my mother. "Rebecca, dear. Look at you, all grown up and sophisticated," Mrs. Sullivan greeted me warmly. "I was just dropping off my traditional Christmas Eve cookies. Your mother invited me in for coffee." Mrs. Sullivan had been our neighbor since I was born. Unlike most adults in my childhood, she had always shown a particular interest in my artistic pursuits, displaying my drawings on her refrigerator and attending my sparse art shows when my own family made excuses. "I'll leave you two to catch up," Mom said, glancing at her watch. "I need to pick up Grandma from the train station." "Mrs. Sullivan, will we see you tomorrow for dinner?" "Wouldn't miss it," the older woman replied with a smile that faded slightly as my mother left the room. When we were alone, Mrs. Sullivan studied me over her coffee cup. "You look troubled, dear." Something about her kind eyes and genuine concern broke through my carefully constructed facade. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything: the overheard conversation, the video compilation, the involvement of my ex-boyfriend, my feelings of betrayal and helplessness. Mrs. Sullivan listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Rebecca, I've known your family for over 30 years, she said gently. "What you're describing isn't right, but it doesn't surprise me." "It doesn't?" I asked. She shook her head. "Your parents have always been insecure people. Your father especially. Do you know he was bullied terribly as a child? And your mother was always trying to fit in with the popular crowd, never quite succeeding." This was news to me. My parents had rarely spoken about their own childhoods. "When you showed talents and interests different from theirs, your art, your books, your ambition to leave Mapleton, I think it triggered that insecurity," she continued. "Instead of celebrating your uniqueness, they tried to bring you down to make themselves feel better." "But why? I'm their daughter." "Sometimes the people who should love us the most unconditionally are the least equipped to do so," Mrs. Sullivan said sadly. "Your parents love you, Rebecca, but they don't understand you. And what people don't understand, they often fear or resent." Her words struck something deep within me. For years, I'd internalized the idea that there was something wrong with me, that I was too sensitive, too serious, too different. But what if the problem wasn't me at all? "What should I do about tomorrow?" I asked. Mrs. Sullivan squeezed my hand. "That depends on what you want the outcome to be. Do you want revenge? Do you want reconciliation? Do you want to break the cycle?" I considered her question seriously. "I don't want revenge. That would just perpetuate the pattern. But I can't let them humiliate me again, either." "Then perhaps it's time to stand up and speak your truth," she suggested. "Not with anger or accusation, but with honesty and dignity." After Mrs. Sullivan left, I retreated to my room to think. My phone rang, Amanda calling to check in. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I just had an interesting conversation with my elderly neighbor," I replied, sharing Mrs. Sullivan's insights about my parents' backgrounds. "That actually makes a lot of sense," Amanda said. Hurt people, as the saying goes. "But understanding why they're doing it doesn't make it okay," I countered. "Of course not. But it gives you power. Knowledge always does." Amanda's words triggered something in my mind. Power, knowledge, you're right. I need more information. After we hung up, I drove to the Mapleton Public Library, one of my childhood sanctuaries. The building was nearly empty on Christmas Eve, with only the head librarian, Ms. Winters, staffing the reference desk. "Rebecca Miller. What a lovely surprise," she greeted me. Ms. Winters had been another adult who had encouraged my interests when I was young, recommending books and praising my writing. "Ms. Winters, do you have any books on family psychology? Specifically about toxic family dynamics?" If she was surprised by my request, she didn't show it. Instead, she led me to a section on family systems and psychology, pulling several volumes that might be helpful. For the next 3 hours, I read about family roles and patterns, about scapegoating and golden children, about how dysfunctional families often designate one member as the identified patient, the one who carries the family's dysfunction through being labeled as the problem. The more I read, the more clarity I gained. The dynamics in my family weren't random, they followed classic patterns described in these psychology books. I wasn't imagining things or being too sensitive. What my family did, singling me out for humiliation, dismissing my feelings, bonding with each other at my expense, had names in psychology literature. It was real. Armed with this new understanding, I formulated a plan. Not a plan for revenge or escape, but for reclaiming my dignity and potentially helping my family see the damage they'd done. Back at home, the house was full of Christmas Eve energy. Dad and James were setting up the extra tables for tomorrow's dinner. Mom and Ellie were baking pies and preparing dishes that could be made ahead. The atmosphere was festive, with Christmas music playing and the scent of cinnamon and pine in the air. I moved through these preparations with new awareness, observing the family dynamics with clearer eyes. I noticed how Dad subtly put down Mom's cooking while praising Ellie's. How James took credit for Dad's work on the table arrangement. How Mom criticized Ellie's appearance while simultaneously seeking her approval for the menu choices. It wasn't just me. Everyone in this family was caught in patterns of seeking validation through putting others down, of building connection through shared targets. I had been the primary target because I was different, because I had left, because I didn't play by the unspoken family rules. That evening, as we gathered in the living room for the traditional Christmas Eve viewing of It's a Wonderful Life, I watched my family members' faces illuminated by the TV screen. Dad, with his forced joviality that masked deep insecurity. Mom, constantly seeking approval through her perfect hostessing. James, the golden son who never quite felt secure in that position. Ellie, desperate to belong even at the cost of her integrity. For the first time, I saw them not as the powerful figures of my childhood who could hurt me with impunity, but as damaged, insecure people caught in their own painful patterns. It didn't excuse what they had planned for tomorrow, but it helped me approach it with something beyond fear and resentment. As the movie ended and everyone prepared for bed, Mom asked, "Are you excited for tomorrow, Becca? It'll be quite the gathering." The knowing gleam in her eye made my stomach clench, but I smiled calmly. Actually, I am. I think tomorrow will be memorable for everyone. In my bedroom, I stayed up late, preparing for what would likely be the most important presentation of my life. Not a client pitch or a campaign launch, but a moment of truth with the people who had shaped me, for better and worse. By the time I finally went to sleep in the early hours of Christmas morning, my plan was set. Tomorrow, when my family tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, they would discover that I wasn't the same vulnerable target I had been all those years. Tomorrow, the cycle would end, one way or another. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off the fresh snow. Downstairs, the living room was transformed with twinkling lights and presents under the tree. For a moment, looking at the scene, I could almost believe in the perfect family facade we presented to the world. We went through the motions of Christmas morning, opening gifts, exclaiming over presents, eating Mom's traditional breakfast casserole. I had purchased thoughtful gifts for everyone, a rare fishing lure for Dad, artisanal cooking oils for Mom, a vintage engineering manual for James, and handcrafted earrings for Ellie. Their gifts to me were predictably impersonal, a generic sweater, a scented candle, a gift card. "Thanks for the sweater, Mom," I said sincerely. "It'll be perfect for job interviews." "Well, we thought you could use something a bit more conventional than your usual style," she replied, glancing at my black dress. I just smiled. Today, I wouldn't rise to any bait. As morning turned to afternoon, the house became a flurry of preparation for the evening dinner. I volunteered for every task, setting the elaborate table, arranging centerpieces, polishing silverware. My family seemed surprised by my willingness to help, exchanging glances that clearly communicated they thought I was clueless about their plans. Around 4, I excused myself to get ready, taking extra time with my appearance. I chose my outfit carefully, a deep emerald dress that was both festive and sophisticated, with a subtle gold necklace and heels. I styled my hair in loose waves and applied makeup that enhanced without overwhelming my features. Looking in the mirror, I saw confidence and poise, the successful professional I'd become in Chicago, not the insecure girl my family still saw. I also packed a small bag with essentials, just in case things didn't go as I hoped. By 6, guests began arriving. First came the extended family, Grandma and Grandpa Miller, Aunt Martha and Uncle Phil with their teenage children, cousins from my father's side. Then the neighbors, the Johnsons, the Thompsons, and Mrs. Sullivan, who gave me a knowing nod and a reassuring squeeze of my hand. Then came the high school contingent. Grace arrived with her husband, followed by several former classmates I hadn't seen in years. Rachel Thompson brought her yearbooks as instructed, setting them conspicuously on the side table with a wink at my mother. And finally, the moment I'd been dreading, Tyler walked in with his wife Jessica, her pregnancy visible under her red holiday dress. He had aged well, still handsome in that conventional small-town way, though a receding hairline had begun to thin his once thick blonde hair. "Becca," he greeted me with the presumptuous familiarity of someone who once broke your heart but assumes you're over it. "Great to see you. This is my wife, Jessica." "Lovely to meet you," I said to Jessica, extending my hand. "Congratulations on your pregnancy. When are you due?" "March," she replied, clearly surprised by my genuine tone. "A boy." "How wonderful for you both," I said, meaning it. Looking at Tyler now, I felt nothing but a vague wonder that I had ever found him so devastatingly important. Throughout the pre-dinner mingling, I moved through the rooms with deliberate grace, engaging warmly with each guest. I asked about their lives, listened attentively to their responses, and shared edited highlights of my Chicago existence. I noticed my family watching me with confusion. This confident, sociable woman wasn't the awkward, easily flustered target they had anticipated. Dinner was served at 7, the dining room a showcase of my mother's entertaining skills. 2 long tables accommodated the 30 guests, with festive centerpieces, elegant place settings, and glowing candles. I was seated between Tyler's wife and a former classmate named Mark, directly across from my parents. Throughout the meal, I engaged in pleasant conversation, deflecting personal questions with ease and redirecting attention to others at the table. When Tyler mentioned my big city career crash, I smiled and said, "Actually, I see it as an opportunity to pivot into new creative directions. Sometimes what looks like failure is just redirection." As dessert was served, Mom's famous apple pie with homemade ice cream, I noticed increasing glances between my family members. My father checked his watch repeatedly, while James disappeared briefly to the basement, returning with a small nod to Dad. Ellie's excitement was barely contained as she practically bounced in her seat. Finally, as coffee was poured, my father stood and tapped his glass for attention. "Thank you all for joining the Miller family for our Christmas celebration," he began, his voice carrying that jovial tone he used for public speaking. "It's especially wonderful to have our daughter Rebecca home from Chicago this year." All eyes turned to me, and I smiled calmly, taking a deliberate sip of water. "And since Rebecca doesn't visit as often as we'd like," he continued, "we thought it would be fun to take a little trip down memory lane. James has prepared a special presentation, a little compilation we like to call Becca's Greatest Hits." Laughter rippled through the room as James stood and moved toward the large television that had been conspicuously positioned at the end of the dining room. This was the moment they had planned, the culmination of their elaborate humiliation scheme. I could feel the anticipation in the room, the eager curiosity of guests who had been primed to expect entertainment at my expense. But before James could reach the TV, I stood up. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and steady, "if we're going to take a trip down memory lane, I'd like to say a few words first." The room fell silent. This wasn't part of the script. My father looked confused, then slightly alarmed. "Becca, we have a whole presentation planned," he began. "I know," I interrupted gently. "I know all about the presentation. I found the video you compiled of my most embarrassing moments. I know you invited everyone here to witness my humiliation." Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. My mother's face drained of color. James froze mid-step. "Rebecca, I don't know what you think," my mother started. "It's okay, Mom," I said, still maintaining my calm tone. "I'm not angry. But I think it's important for me to speak my truth before we proceed." I moved to stand at the head of the table, surveying the room of shocked faces. For those of you who don't know, my family has a tradition of practical jokes and public roasting. For as long as I can remember, I've been the primary target. The video you're about to see is a compilation of my most painful and embarrassing moments from childhood through high school, set to humiliating music, with commentary designed to maximize my discomfort. The room was deadly silent now. Mrs. Sullivan caught my eye and gave a subtle nod of encouragement. "I want to be clear, I'm not sharing this to make anyone feel bad or to create drama," I continued. "But for years, I've accepted the role of family punching bag because I was told it was just good fun, that I was too sensitive, that this is what families do." I looked directly at my parents, whose expressions had shifted from shock to shame. But the truth is, deliberately humiliating someone isn't fun for them. It's bullying. And when it happens repeatedly over decades, it's emotional abuse. My voice broke slightly on the last word, but I maintained my composure. I love this family. Despite everything, I do. But I can't continue to be the target that everyone else bonds over hurting. It's not healthy, for any of us. I paused, taking in the uncomfortable shifting of guests, the downcast eyes, the expressions of dawning recognition on some faces. I know my family didn't intend to hurt me. I believe they thought they were just carrying on a tradition, having some fun. But intentions don't negate impact. And the impact has been years of feeling unworthy, different, and unlovable in my own family. I turned to James. "You can play the video you prepared if you want. I've already watched it. But first, I'd like to show a different video, one I put together last night." From my purse, I removed a flash drive and walked over to the television. James wordlessly stepped aside as I connected it and pressed play. The screen lit up with a different kind of compilation, moments of genuine connection in our family history. Dad teaching me to ride a bike, his face proud when I finally balanced. Mom comforting me after I lost a debate competition, whispering encouragement. James and me laughing hysterically while building a snowman. Ellie and I hugging on her first day of kindergarten. Interspersed with these clips were photos of my accomplishments that my family had largely ignored: art show ribbons, my college graduation, the advertising award I'd won last year. The final image was a family portrait from 15 years ago, all of us smiling genuinely, arms around each other. When the short video ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. My mother was openly sobbing. My father stared at the floor, his jaw working. James looked shell-shocked. Ellie's makeup was streaked with tears. "This is who we could be," I said softly. "This is who I believe we are, underneath the hurtful patterns. This is the family I want to be part of." I looked around the room, at the guests who had come expecting entertainment and received uncomfortable truth instead. I'm not perfect. I've made plenty of mistakes. But no one deserves to be deliberately humiliated for others' entertainment. Not me, not anyone in this room. I turned back to James. "So no, I don't think we need to watch the video you prepared. I think we've all seen enough." With that, I returned to my seat, heart pounding but head high. The silence in the room was deafening until, from the far end of the table, Mrs. Sullivan began to applaud. Slowly, others joined in, first Grace, then Mark, then several others, until most of the room was clapping. My family remained frozen in place, the full impact of the moment still washing over them. But as the applause died down, my mother stood up shakily. "Rebecca is right," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "What we planned was cruel. I'm so sorry." She looked around the room. "I think it's best if we end dinner early this evening. Thank you all for coming, but I believe our family needs some private time." As guests began to awkwardly gather their things, several stopped to speak to me. Mrs. Sullivan hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Tyler couldn't meet my eyes as he mumbled a goodbye. Grace pressed her business card into my hand, saying, "Call me tomorrow. For real this time." And surprisingly, Mark, my dinner companion, asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime during my stay. "I work in graphic design," he explained. "I've always admired your eye for visual composition." I accepted, pleasantly surprised by the genuine connection. As the last guests departed, I stood in the living room surrounded by the remains of Christmas dinner, facing my family and whatever would come next. After the last guest departed, an uncomfortable silence filled the house. The remains of our elaborate dinner sat abandoned on the tables, half-empty wine glasses, partially eaten desserts, crumpled napkins. The physical aftermath of an emotional earthquake. My father was the first to break the silence. "Rebecca, I think we need to talk," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I nodded. "Yes, we do." We gathered in the living room, the Christmas tree lights providing the only illumination. My family seemed smaller somehow, stripped of their power to hurt me. Mom sat on the edge of the sofa, twisting a tissue in her hands. Dad took his usual armchair but perched uncomfortably rather than lounging. James leaned against the mantel, arms crossed defensively. Ellie curled up in the corner of the sofa, looking younger than her 28 years. "What you did tonight," my father began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. "Was it true?" my mother asked quietly. "Have we really been abusing you all these years?" The naked vulnerability in her question caught me off guard. I chose my words carefully. "I don't think you intended it that way," I said. "But yes, the impact was harmful. Being singled out repeatedly for humiliation, having my feelings dismissed, being told I was too sensitive when I expressed hurt, it all added up to a pattern that damaged my self-worth and my trust in this family." "But they were just jokes," James protested weakly. "Everyone gets teased. There's a difference between good-natured teasing that everyone enjoys and targeted humiliation," I explained. "When the same person is always the butt of the joke, when their genuine distress is ignored or mocked, when the jokes focus on their deepest insecurities, that crosses a line." "Why didn't you say something before?" Dad asked. "I did," I replied simply. "Many times. I cried, I asked you to stop, I told you it hurt my feelings. You told me I needed to lighten up or take a joke. After a while, I stopped trying because it never made a difference." My mother's face crumpled. "Oh God," she whispered. "You're right. I remember now, all those times you'd run to your room crying, and we'd just laugh about how dramatic you were being." "I never thought about how it must have felt for you," Ellie admitted, her voice small. "I was just glad it wasn't me." The conversation moved to the kitchen, where Mom instinctively began making coffee while we continued talking. For the first time, I shared openly about how their treatment had affected me, the anxiety I'd developed about family gatherings, the way I'd structured my life to minimize time in Mapleton, the therapy I'd needed to address my deep-seated insecurities. To my surprise, my family began to open up too. Mom tearfully confessed that she'd always felt insecure about my independence and intelligence. "You seemed so confident about leaving Mapleton, about wanting different things than I had," she explained. "I guess part of me wanted to bring you down a peg to make myself feel better." Dad revealed that his own father had used public humiliation as a disciplinary tactic. "I swore I'd never be like him," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I didn't realize I was repeating the pattern in a different way. And I just followed Dad's lead," James admitted. "It was easier to join in than to stand up for you." As the night deepened, our conversation grew more honest than any we'd ever had. There were difficult moments, defensive reactions, attempts to minimize, old patterns reasserting themselves. But there were also breakthroughs, genuine apologies, moments of understanding, promises to do better. "I can't say everything is fixed," I told them as our conversation wound down around 2 a.m. "Trust takes time to rebuild. But this is a start." The following morning, Christmas Day officially over, Mom found me having coffee alone in the kitchen. I couldn't sleep, she confessed, pouring herself a cup. I kept thinking about all the times I must have hurt you without even realizing it. Mom. No, let me finish, she interrupted gently. I'm your mother. I was supposed to protect you, not be the source of your pain. I failed you, Rebecca. And I am so sorry. She reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes welling with tears. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know I'm going to do better. I want to really know you, the real you, not the version of you I made up in my head. That simple acknowledgement felt more healing than I could have imagined. Over the next few days, small changes began to manifest. Dad asked genuine questions about my advertising work, listening attentively to my explanations of creative strategy. James showed me his current engineering projects, creating a bridge of mutual professional respect. Ellie invited me to help grade her students' art projects, valuing my perspective. None of it was perfect. Old habits occasionally surfaced, but now they were identified and addressed rather than ignored. We were learning a new way to be family, one based on respect rather than ridicule. On December 30th, I received an unexpected email from a design agency in Chicago. A colleague had recommended me for a creative director position opening in February. The salary was competitive, and the work aligned perfectly with my strengths. When I shared the news with my family over dinner, their reaction surprised me. That's wonderful, Becca. Mom exclaimed, without a hint of the usual passive-aggressive "so you're leaving again" subtext. You'd be perfect for that, Dad added sincerely. Does this mean you'll be moving back to Chicago soon? Ellie asked. Eventually, yes, I replied. But I'd like to stay in Mapleton a few more weeks if that's okay. I have some things to figure out, and I think there's more healing to do here. The smile that spread across my mother's face was worth more than words. That evening, I called Mark, the graphic designer I'd met at Christmas dinner, and we arranged to meet for coffee the following day. Our conversation flowed easily, centered on shared creative interests and experiences. As a Mapleton native who had studied in New York before returning to open his own design studio, he understood both worlds I inhabited. You know, he said as we parted, there's actually a pretty decent creative community developing here. Several of us work remotely for clients all over the country. It's not Chicago, but it's not the cultural wasteland it was when we were growing up, either. The idea of creative opportunities in my hometown was something I'd never considered. On New Year's Eve, I met Grace for lunch. Our renewed connection felt genuine, based on who we were now rather than shared history. What you did at that dinner was the bravest thing I've ever seen, she told me. It made me think about patterns in my own family that I've just accepted as normal. Sometimes it takes stepping away to see things clearly, I replied. But you came back, she pointed out. That took even more courage. As January unfolded, I continued interviewing remotely for positions in Chicago while also exploring the possibility of freelance work that would allow for more flexibility in location. I reconnected with people from my past on my own terms, discovering that many had grown and changed just as I had. The process of healing with my family continued, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful, always necessary. We began a tradition of weekly family dinners where genuine conversation was prioritized over performance or mockery. Old wounds were acknowledged rather than hidden, creating space for authentic connection. One evening in mid-January, as we gathered around the dinner table, I looked at the faces of my family, imperfect, complicated people who had hurt me deeply but were now trying, really trying, to do better, and felt something I hadn't experienced in their presence for years: peace. I've been thinking, I said during a lull in conversation, about that advertising position in Chicago. Everyone looked at me expectantly. I'm going to take it, I continued, but I've negotiated a partial remote work arrangement. I'll need to be in Chicago 3 days a week, but the other days I could work from anywhere. You're thinking of keeping a connection to Mapleton? My father asked, surprise evident in his voice. Maybe, I replied. Not living here full-time, at least not yet. but not being a stranger either. The smile that spread across my mother's face spoke volumes. Later that night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I reflected on the journey of the past several weeks. I had come home feeling defeated, jobless, nearly broke, dreading the inevitable family drama. I had discovered a plot to humiliate me that confirmed my worst fears about my place in the family. But instead of retreating or exploding, I had found the courage to speak my truth with dignity and compassion. And in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my power but helped initiate healing for the entire family system. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. Rebuilding trust would take time. Old patterns might resurface. The Chicago job would bring new challenges. But for the first time, I felt I could navigate these uncertainties from a place of strength rather than fear. My worth was no longer determined by my family's perception or anyone else's. I had found my voice, not by becoming harder or more defensive, but by embracing my authentic self with all its sensitivity and strength. As I packed some of my belongings to take back to Chicago for my first week of work, I came across a sketch I'd drawn years ago, a self-portrait from high school art class that had captured both my vulnerability and resilience. I carefully placed it in my portfolio. It was part of my story, part of who I was and who I had become. The journey of healing family relationships is rarely straightforward. There are no perfect resolutions, no moment when everything is suddenly fixed. But there are new beginnings, small shifts that create space for change, brave conversations that open doors long shut. This Christmas had been painful, transformative, and ultimately hopeful, not because everything was perfect, but because truth had finally been spoken and heard. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift of all. Have you ever had to stand up to family traditions that were hurtful? Or found yourself having to set boundaries with loved ones? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, speaking your truth with dignity is never wrong, and healing begins when we have the courage to acknowledge pain rather than hiding it. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and may your own path lead to healing, authenticity, and peace.